All right, welcome back. Episode 5, Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com. Who do we have?
Oh, Robin Kroll.
Kevin Butler.
Riley Murray.
Michael Turksani. Okay, today we are talking about customer journeys. It's a new lingo, Kev.
It's the new way of marketing, I think.
It's the new buzzword. Everybody's latching on to customer journeys. We're going to latch onto it too.
We already have been. I think, here's what I think, though. I think the days of one-off siloed tactics are well and over, right? Whether it's B2B or B2C, I think any buyer today needs to be engaged with and needs to interact back with the brand or the company. And I think when we say journeys, we're talking about a series of those interactions that are planned or reacted to through technology as a means to do so.
So we're going to talk about what is customer journeys, what are customer journeys, how did we get here how did we arrive at customer journeys, quote unquote, why it's important to go through a planning process, and then how would you actually do that planning process? Because we're kind of in the throes of that on a daily basis. So why don't we talk about how did we get here? It used to be called marketing automation, used to be called automated programs. What else did they used to call it?
Email marketing?
Email marketing, point and shoot, touch points, omni-channel. What would we?
Spray and pray, all those things. But you know what? I love the fact that it's called a customer journey because the first word is customer.
That's right.
Everything else is just all about the automation, the technology, when really it's the customer who we're trying to attract here. So they should be the first word out.
Okay,
right?
You're all going to roll your eyes because you've heard me say this a million
Oh,
times,
no.
but I think marketing automation is a bad name for marketing automation.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like set and
We're
forget.
nodding.
like,
We're nodding in agreement.
I've created an email. I'm done for the day. It's 9:15. Save
What
the golf course.
about, okay, so then there's also, that's another bad name, is this whole lead to revenue management platform. Because that silos it pretty squarely in only revenue,
Yeah.
right?
Marketing automation isn't strictly about the revenue. It's about giving your customers that good experience that they're looking for.
That's right.
I know it should be like, I don't know, lead to revenue. Because, we've actually talked about this before. We're at a digital marketing conference earlier this year. And I'm on stage talking, and I asked a poll of 500 marketers who's here, whose job mandate is primarily around lead gen, and like a quarter of the room raised their hand.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's more like audience engagement. That's broad, but engagement, whether it's converting on revenue or filling out a form or just doing an action.
Right. Or moving a customer down to that next step, whatever that step happens to be.
That's right.
It could be additional, survey details, or you might be trying to get people to a webinar. I mean, ultimately, a lot of the marketing's role is going to be about revenue uplift, but it's not necessarily that straightforward, just driving a lead or a purchase.
It's not linear anymore,
It's not
right?
linear,
So when you
yeah.
talk about lead to revenue, if you sort of picture that, you would naturally think, there's step 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody kind of goes along that in the
then
same
you're done.
direction. So nobody can see this, but Riley's, she's
It's not even a step ladder.
Yeah.
It's like a giant circle with pinpoints in between it.
Exactly. So you think of like the concept of a journey is that hopefully you're moving forward, but you might move sideways and then backwards, and it's very hard to actually, to act on it until you can visualize it, right? So you gotta walk through this whole process and think of every possible, step that a customer can take.
Right. So now you've got a platform.
Also,
Yeah.
not necessarily in the same sequential order.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Different for
Everyone's
different
journey
customers,
is
sure.
different, right? So I think it's map out the steps or stages you require of an audience to do a thing or that you think needs to happen in order to get to a significant milestone, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same
That order. Yeah.
Right.
So now the platforms, to your point, are going through the entire customer journey, which means, they were a lead, they become a customer, they are a customer, and now, what does the platform do to continue that customer experience along the way?
I think one of the things sorry to cut you off, but it just kind of gave me a thought is, I think one of the things we're seeing in marketing a bit now is, one, marketing owns a lot more of the life cycle. It's not just once they sign the first contract, great, they're off to the account team, and the account team now owns it. I think marketing owns all of that P&L and the money derived from it. But we're also seeing tools, strategies, and technologies to say, hey, we're going to support the in-life part of that cycle more because we actually think it's worth more than the initial contract long term. And so that's why marketers are focusing a lot more on that part of the journey now. And that's why Salesforce and Adobe and IBM and Oracle all have marketing clouds now
Sure.
designed to address that.
Sure.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's I guess it's the I don't know, it's the value, right? So sort of, well, it's the value of a the continued customer experience, but it's also a changed focus from, once you're a customer, that's it. We know you're going to continue to be a customer, so we don't have to treat you and invest in you the same way. Well, it's not like that anymore, right?
No, but I think what we're seeing is if you're providing the right experiences and the right value, customers will renew and continually invest, and in some cases a lot more than the original contract.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had marketing is bringing these platforms into the business that now can interact with the CRM, the service tools that are in play, as well as all the maybe marketing and e-commerce, that side of the tooling. And they're the ones that have now the ability to add that same messaging value and that overall approach into these other areas. So you don't have that, well, it just ends here and now someone else's problem. It's like, well, no, actually, with the same suite of tools, we can stitch that experience all the way through. And it might still be a customer success VP or C-level that has a level of that CRO that might have that revenue stream on the current customer side. But the marketing platform that's being brought in place is actually the technology that is underpinning a lot of that value add across their process, sales process, as well as the front end marketing process. So I think what we're seeing is that how did we get to journeys? I guess it's largely probably now we're seeing this new breed of marketing automation platforms that allow you to really kind of have a journey. In the past, you kind of, it was sort of disjointed, and the journey came from a lot of manual process stitched together. Now you have the ability
And
more than
those
ever.
platforms also allow you to utilize different types of journeys, because if you're a B2B business, you can have multiple different customer paths. You can have a customer path that is the small mom and pop shop, and you can have a customer path that's going to be that giant global industry. And those are two very different customer journeys
On the same system.
on the same system.
Right.
Yeah, and I love the idea too. If you think of a mid-sized marketing department where you have a demand gen or a lead gen manager, and you have a customer marketing manager, and this idea that you can envision that whole journey from sort of start to end, and then at some point in the middle, the responsibility transitions from the lead gen manager to the customer marketing manager, and then each can see the journey that their peer is responsible for as a means to make it consistent all the way through. Like, that's just really interesting to me as we look at that, because before I think there'd be that clear line where it's, I don't know what they did, I don't even know if I care, I've got this thing to do, and does it even make sense in the eyes of the customer at that point?
Yeah.
I think that's another one of the powers of the new suite of marketing automation platforms, right? So it's not just the planning, but then that visibility and that reporting, because you can plan out a customer journey that can be really well thought out, but if you can't see how customers are actually moving through that journey and be able to react and have the right person react, well, it's going to fail quickly. And you can plan as best as possible, but it's only when customers funnel through that you can be able to see if you've planned it properly, and you can go ahead and sort of shift gears, optimize, and that's where you're going to continue with the success.
Okay, so I think we're all pretty well aligned on how we got here, and this new buzzword, this new approach, customer journeys. Let's talk about the importance of planning. We'll talk about how to do it. So let's just maybe talk about, like, why do you have to sit down and plan these journeys, and explore the implications of maybe not doing that upfront work and just blasting right into. But then also, why should you, if you're a business owner and you're looking at investing in what could be like a sizable digital investment to put in, the technology and the service to transform your business, why it's so important for them to understand, well, do the customer journey mapping, do a level of that anyway when you get going.
Well, one of the key points that, as soon as you were saying that, to go back to my previous statement about how there's within the same business or the same industry, there's multiple different customer journeys. If you're not sitting down and you're not identifying those customer journeys before you start, you could send everybody out on the same path, and they're not going to make it all the way to the end of their journey because it wasn't targeted directly to them.
Anytime you make an investment, you're gonna you'd want to see, how is this investment actually going to be successful, right? So if you go to a base of building a house, right? So you're going to go ahead and lay down the money, but as you're building your structure, you're going to have to think, okay, what happens first? What happens next? What do I pull together? Obviously, I've never built a house because you're not explaining it properly, but hopefully people listening will understand that, there is a process to building a house, and that if you just say, well, I'm just going to build a house, and you just throw all the pieces together, your house is going to come tumbling down. Same thing in a marketing and a marketing automation and a customer journey. You make the investment. You have to think about how people are going to engage with your brand, and I think the other part about why you would lay this out at the beginning is thinking about, well, who has to be involved in that conversation, right? So there are different people. Kevin, you talked about, someone who's in charge of demand gen versus, customer success. But then you think of all the people in your organization that have visibility, or they have, they're involved in this customer journey, from customer service reps, from salespeople, that all are going to be able to contribute to that conversation.
And how often do those people end up interjecting at a customer cycle during multiple points? It's not just at one time.
Sure, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you said that, but the other part, going back to the house analogy, is true, is you're not just building a bunch of rooms that stand next to and on top of each other. They work together.
No, you start with foundation. That word I know, the foundation. Yeah.
Foundation, yeah. But it's also about how they work together in sequence, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, if you want an upstairs and a downstairs, there's a staircase that has to connect, and there has to, it has to all work together. And I think the same thing for, as you piece together these steps in some sort of sequence, ideally, for a marketing journey, is this idea of, like, does step 2 make sense in context to step 1? And will it make sense for step 3? And what are the role that each of them play individually? But more importantly, do they all actually make up communications of the same message?
Yeah, and lead to the same sort of a trajectory, right? You don't want to have everybody walk through your bathroom to get to the dining room. That just doesn't make sense. It's not going to work.
Yeah, if you really have to go to the bathroom, it probably does.
Well, yes, that's true.
Yeah, I think if you were, when I think of what you guys are talking about with the various departments and how, Riley, you said, people aren't necessarily following the same journey, and people in the business from maybe the more analog, picking up the phone or talking to people, they could be coming in and out at any step too. But when I think of, like, why you would do this, if a business said, well, we just want to make sure that there's a digital layer running through everything that we're doing that touches the customer. So we don't actually know what that means yet, but from a top-down mandate, we want a single thread to tie through the whole thing. So now you guys, from a team perspective, determine what's the best way. So if a executive were to say that, be like, we're kind of already bought into the benefits of that. Like, we would obviously need to test the implementation approaches for us, but when we think of, like, the ability to get an uptick in revenue or the ability to be more efficient, we just believe that having a thread or a layer that stitches through the whole piece, that's going to be valuable. So if you started there, then it's like, well, of course, a customer journey mapping strategy sessions are going to be extremely worthwhile and get approval, because they're going to be, well, of course we want to have that conversation because you've laid the top-down mandate. Service is going to be at the table, sales is going to be at the table, and we're going to look for ways to improve their workflow and the customer's workflow, and it all works.
Streamline the sales process, right?
Yeah, when it's not, I think when you don't have an executive or a team that really can buy into, well, why would I have that across my whole business? then the whole concept of like, why would you do the journey mapping becomes more difficult, because I think you run into these silos where other departments now, while we have a system that may be connected to some degree, they're not bought in. So they're not looking for ways to be more efficient or to uptick, right?
Well, that would imply potentially that organization isn't truly putting the customer first, right? Or at least the top mandate from leadership should be the customer does come first, and each of our jobs is really to put them in the middle, then build our value prop, messaging, communications around that. But one of the things I really like that you said, and I think this kind of aligns with a lot of the things we talk about in technology investments, is this idea of starting out small with some sort of have a message, or what do you call it, the thin band across the whole journey. Just start there. Like, you don't have to have the whole thing figured out at once in order to do it. Like, this thing's going to live, breathe, and evolve as you learn how
Absolutely.
your audience engages. So I love the idea of just starting out really small and just have one straight line all the way through. It doesn't matter how thick or big it is per se.
I think no matter how thick or thin that line is, you still have to have some internal management around exactly how those different areas of that line are going to be talking to each other, because you're not doing your customer any benefits if your phone room that's in sales and your email room aren't actually doing the communication together. And I think that's something that maybe businesses don't necessarily think about when they're strategizing about customer journeys. They're thinking about the end goal of that customer. They're not thinking about how their web development team's going to interact with the phone room.
Absolutely. Exactly. And I think that makes it hard to sell the, vision of doing the customer journey,
The broader
mapping
one, for sure.
to begin with, because they're going to just see, well, isn't this just, a web exercise or a digital exercise over here?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do we need to talk about these other things, right? Not realizing, to your point, Robin, that it really all starts with the customer. So if we think of how the customer moves through our business, well, all of a sudden now that, maybe the light bulb goes on, but you get into, complexities, because there's, other ways that people are compensated, and there's different, approaches, and there's all this other kind of stuff, right?
But I love the idea of this house building analogy, that no one job or task in building a house really completes the whole thing on its own. It all has to work together. And I think if you define that broader strategy, and this is where the executive team has to come together and say the top priority is this, and we've identified that sales and ops and marketing each have 16% of the pie or whatever. It's about, did you do those things in your slice to help propel the journey forward, not did you crush it and only you and your department, and sorry, customer service, you didn't uphold it.
I think we need to change the house analogy almost into like a condo analogy with an elevator in it or something, because a lot of these customer journeys end up recycling. You're going to go back down to floor 2 after you've made your initial investment or purchase or whatever that is, so that you can start your journey again.
Right.
I know it's funny you say that, because we have a slide in one of our sales decks, and it's this sort of arrow starting from one side of the page and points up to the upper right-hand corner of the other one. It's this idea of marketing automation adoption. You start off in the ground floor and kind of move your way up. But what I don't like about it is it's a straight line, and it sort of implies there's an end. And it should really actually be a circle, because I think once you go through and do all what we sort of identified as 5 major stages of adoption, it's like that's probably a 3 to 5 year process to go and do that, and you don't think things have changed from that first step in the 5 years you've gone through and done all these other things. So I like the idea of, yeah, you're right, it's, I don't know if it's recycling, but it's certainly there's always work to be done in terms of engaging that audience or changing and improving how we did that and what the process was behind it.
Yeah, I think it's maybe not recycling, but it's sometimes it's circling back on your steps, or it's you're taking a slightly different path, but you're still using the same process, or in some of the same processes, but you might be using them in a different way. So if you think of a sales process for an initial purchase, and then you might have also a sales process, but it might be for an add-on component, right? So you're still going back through sales, but you're not a brand new customer.
That elevator that takes you down to level 2 has been renovated.
Right. Exactly. So and you're going somewhere else, but you know a little bit, and so if you need to think about it that way, because there is that circular. So customers are engaging with the same department for slightly different reasons. And so, how does that work in the whole customer journey? So, if one department is just focused on delivering one thing, so to your point, Kevin, if they're just saying, you know what, I can tick all the boxes that my process from my main, what I'm supposed to be doing, that works, they're not thinking about, well, what if somebody else is coming back to sales for something else, for another, similar reason? Well, they could be creating a roadblock.
Yeah, and then you look at another reason to do it. I think there's going to be at least one more after this, but would be to sort of obsess over those stages and say, well, wait, what does that actually look like when they get to that stage? If they make it to a credit process, and all of a sudden, like, what happens? Like, do they get 15 emails a day? Like, do they get a million phone calls? Like, and we've just created this customer journey that like looked and felt so great up here and over here, and then all of a sudden it follows into a portion of the environment, and where maybe it just destroys faith in the customer's eyes, right? So
right, and then if you're not thinking about that, you haven't thought about what it's like for the customer. Exactly, to get those
Right.
15 emails, when if you think about the longer journey, you think, oh, well, maybe we can consolidate that into one or two emails, and then you're actually doing the customer service. And if you can say that in 2 or 3 emails instead of into the 15, you're actually shortening the cycle to move to the next step.
Right.
So you're benefiting the business, but you're benefiting the customer as well, and that can only happen when you're looking at the bigger
the big
picture
picture,
journey.
yeah.
We're doing one of our clients has quite a sophisticated journey we're actually working on right now, and one of the things that we've seen is there's probably a human tendency to get caught up in the numbers. Is it 5 emails? Is it a dozen emails? It doesn't matter. I don't think, like, a number's a number. It's more like, what does the journey require, and how does this actually help the customer experience? If it's a really complex business, then maybe it does require a lot of emails, and maybe that's okay. I mean, there's a level of education with the audience to make sure prospect, customer, whatever, that they understand why they're getting so many emails. Their communications have to be tight and clear in those emails to say, hey, this is why we're doing this. So if it's all logical, then it's fine. No one's complained about a lot of steps if they're well laid out.
If they're warranted, right? The steps are
Right.
warranted, so
Right.
it's not your
I can complain about one step if it doesn't make sense, though.
right.
Yeah. Well, I think, people can complain about steps anyways, but I think what we're saying is if you lay it all out and you can see it, you can say, well, okay, we believe this is
Right.
logical, and oh, geez, we realize that's actually a problem, because when you do go down to the second floor and then you come back up, you will get 5 more emails, or, those don't make any sense. When you go
Right.
down there, they don't even know you're a customer, or you're not leveraging the digital telemetry that is available to you to sort of inch that process along, and you're just sort of treating everybody like a cold situation, right? So the other one is, I think, is the process and the customer journey, but then it's like, how does it impact inside the company? So if you've laid out this multi-step process, or there's a series of things now going on across the business, we've always felt that that's probably the best way to drive the downstream dependencies and requirements from the rest of the organization. So if you've got a Salesforce team over here, and you've got an IT department over there, and now you've built out what everybody agrees makes sense from the customer journey for whatever thing that you might be doing, an acquisition or a customer service. And then it says, well, okay, as a result, those two fields need to tie together. And as a result, that object needs permissions. And as a result, we will need a slightly different piece of data, going forward, right? And now you drive a stream of outputs that allow everybody to bring. So it's like use cases on steroids, right? It was, it's like if you put all the use cases together that made up a thing, customer journey, you could then build your requirements out.
I'd love to see, if you think about all these tools, right? And we've had on this podcast, we've talked about who owns these new sort of new age marketing technologies, right? Is it IT? Is it marketing? Is it whatever? And I think, like, what I'd love to see is some sort of like business technology continuity manager type role, where this individual's role has nothing to do with the messaging going on, the attribution, or anything like that. Maybe some reporting, actually, but it's more like, does this make sense? Like, as a quick, like, side story, I don't know if anyone here watched the show Lost. It's one of my favorite shows.
I did.
But they had by the end the plot had gotten so crazy, and they were talking in multiple timelines. They had literally a plot continuity manager or
Right.
something like that. And this person's job was only entirely focused on, does this actually make sense with what we
Does
said
it
in the
work
past?
with everything? Yeah, neat.
And so that person was responsible to be obsessive over, no, because Jack did this and he saw the dog and whatever. And so I wonder, as these journeys get more complex, as if I got a Lost reference in here, if that there's some sort of continuity business manager, which is saying, oh, that doesn't make sense at all because we said this as sort of the lead in to get this individual into this kind of funnel, and we're not adding value because of all these things. Hey, marketing, I need your help now.
Well, if you think, and I was going to make a pun about getting lost, but I guess that got lost. Anyways, sorry. But the exercise of building out this customer journey, it's not just something you sit around a table and people brainstorm or just stays in your brain. It gets documented, right? So
It's a very collaborative effort.
it's very collaborative. People have buy-in. Then you actually have a living, breathing document. So for a continuity manager, they can easily go to that document and be able to say, all right, we're going to add something in. There's something else we want to do in the business.
But that becomes
right?
their Bible.
That becomes their right. So you're right. So you're saying you need the designated person, but then
Almost,
that
yeah.
actual customer journey document, that is their Bible, and that they have something, and you can test things out, right? So if you drop in another piece to the process, you drop in another sales team, another acquisition, any of those other things, you can drop them in and you can start to see, okay, this is what's going to come out of that box and how is it going to connect along the journey. And it's a lot easier to make sure that, these additional processes, they make sense. And if there's required data for this process, am I capturing it in the steps before? So all those things
Capturing
make
it,
you
can we
align.
use it? And I think
Exactly.
sometimes, just a few comments there. I think sometimes, like anything, people will harp and focus on delivering this perfect thing right away. We know that doesn't exist. It's
No.
like when I look at, we do this for our clients, and when I look at what we start with what we end with, they're not even close to the same document. And I think the point is, well, you have to get the ball rolling somewhere, and Rome wasn't built in a day. And so one of the values, I think, I look at several very different styles of customers of ours who we have these kinds of journeys, and I think the one consistency across them all is they have an outside presence, like an agency like Goose, to sort of, they can just view things without sort of any obstructed sort of preconceived notions or sort of they're too in the weeds of their own business. Like, we're just trying to understand this, and so
we don't
come
have
in.
we don't have sort of a priority or
horse
an
in the race,
agenda,
yeah.
right? So I think that's a really, really good point, and it's very hard to have somebody that's totally impartial within the organization
yeah.
that can orchestrate all of this and get all the people, everybody at the table to share their ideas, and then just kind of sit back and guide without weighing in and saying, well, actually, no, you have more priority over you.
And the important part there is that impartial person or group, the only real priority or responsibility that person or group would have is making sure that this makes sense and this is done to the best of the ability, not appeasing their own department or need. And that pulls us out of purgatory.
So we, I think this is a good segue into how to go about implementing it. But we're at the 30-minute mark, and we're trying to keep these podcasts.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
No, because
don't know.
it's so exciting. There's so much
So,
to talk about, but I think this is good fodder
Yeah.
for
I mean, Kevin
episode
was
6.
rambling a lot. So
I talked
It was the
about Lost
Lost
3
yeah,
times.
he
thing,
was
and then
throwing
my
peppering
pun,
in and
you
a few
know,
things. So
things like that.
I think what we'll do is we'll carry it over to episode 6. And hopefully people like this. I mean, I don't know if they will. We'll check. I mean, like it, subscribe it.
Rate
Don't
it.
Tell us
rate it.
what you
don't
think.
not like it. Rate it. How many networks are we on now? Like we're
Pretty
on like
sure
100 networks. So good luck
Yeah.
finding this
And
podcast.
tell us who you want to hear more from. You know, Riley, Robin, you know,
Riley
or
her
somebody
debut.
else. You
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah, Riley was really good today.
Thank you for joining
Really
us,
good.
Riley.
It's a strong debut by Riley.
Yeah, she weighed in.
I think we'll invite her back.
Robin,
So-
you're pretty good today too.
Well, Riley's going to be on episode 6 because we're literally going to shoot it now.
Oh,
So,
okay, all right.
all right, we'll wrap this baby up. Episode 6 or 4, 5. Peace.